Next up, we are going to add a system to count the score in a way that's persistent when we change the scene, so that we can show the player's score at the end of the game. To do so, we're going to use a feature called auto loads that relies on creating a node that will always be accessible and that we can use anywhere in our projects from the code. So let's go to scene, new scene, to create that new node. We're going to use the custom node button here to create a basic node. Let's call this one player data. It's going to store data related to the player. Save it. We are going to put it in the source folder, create a new autoload folder, and save it as playerdata.tscn. Now let's create a new script where we will manage the score. The thing to understand about the code we're going to put here is that any other script in our project will be able to access it. This node is going to count the score and the deaths of the player. So let's create two variables to store these values. Variable score is going to start at 0, and we're going to create a variable deaths that's going to start at 0 as well, two integers. And we're going to do something there to be able to notify the rest of the game that we updated that node so that the user interface will be able to react to it. So we're going to use signals for that. At the top of the script, let's create two signal updated, and a signal called player died. So updated, you could say values updated, something like that, for example, or we're going to call it score updated to be a bit more precise. We're going to create two functions so that every time we change the score, so if in some script you write score plus equals 1, like so, it's going to go through a function that will increase the score variable and call the signal here. For that, you can use a feature in GDScript called setGet. The setGet keyword allows you to define a function that every time you're going to change that variable, it will send the new value to that function that will process it. So setGet, set score. This is called setting up a setter function. And after the setGet keyword, you first write the name of the setter function, the one that will update the variable. And optionally, you can add a comma and add a getter function, one that will return the score value to the user of the variable. Now we're only going to use a setter, so a function that is going to be called every time we change the score itself. Let's copy this function name and create it to clear the error in the script. So function setScore. Every time you have a setter, it's going to get the value that you want to assign to the variable. You want to make sure that this value is an integer in that case, that is to say a whole number, because that is what our score is, and this function will not return any value. I'll just put the return keyword so we don't have any error here. But to explain, imagine that we're in another script calling playerData.score plus equals 1. Add 1 to the score. I'm going to comment that out. What's going to happen is Godot is going to call that setScore function with the new value of the score. So the current score, 0 plus 1, so 1. Then it does not modify the score variable. This is up to you to do it. So every time you create a setter function, the first thing to do is to say score is equal to the new value passed by the function. And then you can add extra instructions that Godot can follow. In our case, emit signal, and we want to emit the score updated signal. So that way the user interface will be able to listen to that signal and get the new score value at that point from our player data. Or optionally, you could make your signal pass the score value. So you could pass score, or in that case, value. Both variables at this point will hold the same value. But in our example, we chose to not pass the information through the signal, as anyway, everything's going to use that player data directly. We're going to do the same for the deaths. So at this point, you should be able to replicate what we did for the score using the player died signal instead of score updated. I'll let you pause the video and do that. And so it looks like that. I'm going to copy the setGet keyword, set deaths. Note that the convention for setter and getter functions is to call them set underscore followed by the name of the variable, and for getters, get underscore name of the variables. So I'm going to copy and paste the set score function and rename score to death in here. One thing we can do there is use the Control-R shortcut to replace in the selection only. That should be automatically checked if you made a selection before calling the shortcut, and you can replace score with deaths and click replace all. And finally, after you've done that, you want to change the signal name to player died. Now we are going to register that scene, that node, as an auto-loaded node, because right now, if I go, let's say I'm going to open my player script. If I try to type player data, Godot is not going to find it. It's not globally registered yet. So we want to go to project settings, and there is a tab dedicated to the auto load. So click on that. Then in the path, you want to go find your file, playerdata.tscn. So go to source, autoload, playerdata.tscn. Note that we don't actually need to make a scene. As long as your script inherits from node, it is enough. But let's do that now. And it will give that node a name. This is the name you will use to call the node to access that new player data class in your script files. So the default player data is fine. Let's add this and close here. Now we have that autoload registered from anywhere in our script. For example, when the character dies, we can say player data dot deaths plus equals 1. So now we are going to code the death a little bit differently. We're going to create a die function on our player. The reason being that if you want to add new ways for your player to die, you don't want to hard code the death in every block, in every signal callback, like when the enemy touches you. So instead, we're going to create a new function called die. So you can write that here. It's going to give you an error, and go to the bottom of the script where you will create a new function called die. It's not going to return any information, and we're going to increase the number of deaths. So player data.deaths plus equals 1, and we're going to Q3 the player. And with that, it should clear the error, and we have the player death coded. We don't have much more to do. We will automatically later on show the user interface when the player data singleton or autoload emits that player died signal. Now we are going to work on the score. So the score will increase when you stomp an enemy or you collect a coin. Let's go to the enemy scene. So Control-Shift-O to open the enemy scene, and it will automatically open the enemy script. We had a die function already there. So now, when the enemy dies, we want to increase the score. And to do so, we're going to create a new variable, so an exported variable called score, which is the score value of the enemy. So let's say it's 100 points here. Then, in the die function at the bottom of the script, we're going to increase player data.score by the enemy's score value. We finally have the coin, to take care of. So let's open the coin scene. And when the coin is picked, we also had a function for that, because we are going to increase player data.score plus equals, let's call the value score as well, while we had it already on the coin. And so we're going to increase the score by 100 when the coin is picked. And that is it for the score system. That is all you need to make it work. The score and the death count will be persistent between the different scenes. Now, going back to the player data scene and script, we're going to add one last thing. We're going to add a function to reset the score and the deaths when the player restarts the game at the very end. So let's create a new reset function. It's not going to take any parameters and it's not going to return anything. All it does is reset the score to 0 and the deaths to 0. And there I have to add a little precision regarding the way setters work. Setters, setter functions, so set score and set deaths, are going to be called every time you change the score from the outside. So if we go to player.gd, we do player data.deaths plus equals 1, it's going to go through that setter, set deaths. But when you write score equals 0, deaths equals 0 inside the class, like so, it's directly going to modify the variable without going through that function. This is there for flexibility, so that internally inside your class, you can make changes to the variable when you need to. Like in our case, we don't want to emit the player died signal that later on will trigger showing some bit of interface saying you died, restart the game, etc. We just want to reset the values. So that's what we are doing. But with that, let me show you one thing. We are going to play the game, so press F5. We shouldn't have any errors. And then in the top left, you have a remote tab in the scene tree that appears. And that remote tab is going to show you the state of the game scene tree in real time. So you can see one thing. We are in the main screen scene, and we can see our nodes, our UI nodes. Player data is also there, automatically loaded for us. This is why these nodes and this feature is called auto load. Then if I click play, the nodes change in the scene tree. So we have the player and all the level, the tile map, etc. But the player data did not change. And this is what these auto loads do. Furthermore, if you look on the right, I've selected the player data and you can see live its values. So you can see that as I move the player around and I collect coins, the score value of my player increases. Now I'm going to die and the death count increased as well. With that, in the next video, we can add the game user interface, including the pause menu.